I've certainly noticed that AI is being used more and more by people in their day-to-day lives. In fact, I think it's something that's kind of crept up on us. People are now using AI without even really realizing it, whether it's for making payments with biometric authentication or in other areas like choosing what you see on your social media feed, which I think raises the question, how can we make sure that all of these uses of AI are ethical? And practically, what does that mean for merchants and for banks who are using AI? Let's find out in this episode of Navigating Digital Payments.
Welcome to the Navigating Digital Payments podcast, brought to you by Worldline, bringing you the latest innovations, trends, and predictions about the future of payments.
Hello and welcome to this episode of the Navigating Digital Payments podcast. I'm David Daly. I look after the Discovery Hub here at Worldline, and I'm really interested during this episode to be having a discussion with two real experts on AI about this topic of how it can be used ethically. We have Charlotte Pascal, who is an R&D project manager at Worldline. Hi, Charlotte. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, David. Thank you. I'm really glad to be here to talk about this key topic, I think.
Brilliant to have you on board and to get your insights on this. And we're also joined by Yassine Kessassi, who is a senior AI scientist at Worldline. Yassine, great to have you here.
Thank you, David. It's a real pleasure today to be with you and to share some information about this key topic today.
Likewise, really looking forward to this discussion and understanding more about it. So at the start, I was talking about AI and how it can be used ethically, and I'm really interested to understand more about that from you both. And also want to come on to a little bit what the industry is doing and what regulators are doing in this area, and also maybe what they're planning to do. But before we come on to those, Charlotte, maybe I can start by asking you to say a little bit more about how the use of AI has increased and how it's more and more entering people's day-to-day lives.
Yes, of course. So you already mentioned the example of social media feeds. And we know now that AI is behind the choice of the posts that you see in your feed. It's not only what you selected, but they decide what you will see. And we can ask the question, how do they decide that? Another example would be the navigation application. When you're in your car, it decides which road you should take because of the speed. But sometimes you arrive nowhere, or maybe sometimes everyone is going on other roads that are not planned for this. So you have some questions there. And the latest applications are all around GPT-like chatbots and generative AI. And even there, you have many ethical questions about the content that is produced and what data were used to produce this content, and how can we make sure that it is not harmful or toxic. And here we have the main limit for the end user, I think. It's the trustworthiness of these applications, which are based on AI. And we know that the text-based LLMs users tend to really trust what it's written because it's in natural language. And even if we know that it often hallucinates, you have this trust from the end users. And here we see some kind of amplification of certain risks. So I think it brings fundamental ethical questions for people who are creating or developing these AI-powered services, like what values should guide this development? Where is the moral responsibility for automated systems? Should we create this particular AI service in the first place? And what could be the known risks and the unintended consequences? So to put it in other words, maybe how to create responsible AI services.
That's a really interesting answer, and it shows it's quite a deep question, actually. There's one thing I just wanted to ask you to clarify a little bit, because you mentioned how with natural language, ChatGPT type AI, people trust it or are likely to trust it more because it's like speaking to a person. But you also mentioned the term hallucinations. Can you say just a little bit more about what that means? Because I guess not everyone will be familiar with the phrase.
Yes, it's when the natural language engine doesn't know what to answer, it will invent the answer, and that's what we call hallucinations. It comes from how it works. So the goal of this kind of engine is to predict the next word and to generate text that way. It's not to find an answer that is true. That's why it tends to hallucinate sometimes.
So it's really interesting. If I understand your answer well, it's essentially using models to generate sentences that are correct from a language point of view or are likely to be correct, but that doesn't guarantee that the actual answer or the information being communicated is necessarily right.
Yes, exactly.
Coming to you, Yassi, with as Charlotte was saying there, AI being used more and more, but also that raising these ethical questions, what implications do you see that has for how AI systems need to be built, and what factors engineers, I guess, have to take into account when they're constructing these systems?
Yeah, sure. With usage comes responsibility. And when we talk about responsibility, we talk about being careful on the way how we design the solutions, be professional, and integrate some industrialization processes in the way how we provide this AI and how we would integrate it into the solutions. This is the only way to be, as I said, responsible and also accountable, because when we are pushing something widely that way, we need also to be accountable. That means the best way to go for it is to separate different steps during which we will push this AI into a product. It means first we need to plan how this AI will be integrated, and secondly, which data we're gonna use and which type of model design we are gonna go for, and finally, how we deploy this solution. And it's only by separating these phases that we can better handle and manage the risk, and also better monitor the solutions. Why I'm talking about monitoring? Because what I've said here, I mean, planning, data gathering, and model deployment are different and offers the way to have also the feedbacks from the model afterwards, putting it into production. Because building the model is one phase, but also being ethical, being responsible is also to follow the behavior of the model into the future. This is about how we should build those systems. And regarding the factors that need to be taken into account, I would say, first of all, in order to handle the impacts, you need to take into account the regulations. Regulations are really important to take into account. Secondly, the usages. Depending on which type of product, which type of industry, which type of client, you will go for different solutions. They are also environmental challenges. We know today that green AI is somehow also what we can put inside ethical AI. Also, if you want to have a solution that will stand and will last into the future, you need it to be interoperable, because you need to avoid like reinventing the wheel each time and make it easily connected to the other solutions in order to make it efficient. This is, I think, the only way which will make AI in the future trustable by the end user for, I would say, a proper usage and a sustainable usage.
I think in your answer there, Yassine, it highlights for me one of those points about AI development, which is with traditional software, you code an algorithm, it's very procedural, and so you know for a given set of inputs exactly what the output is going to be. Whereas with AI, in general, you take a huge amount of data to train a model, and then you run the algorithm and it produces outputs, but it's not always clear why it's producing those outputs. And of course, in some applications, if you're making a credit decision, you need to be able to explain why you reached a particular decision.
I would say that would depend on the type of usage. On some usages, you won't need this explanation. Usually, the less complex is an algorithm, the clearer it is, the more explainable it is, and the more complex it is, the more black box it is. So if the task itself is not really complicated, then usually the model is explainable. The challenge is how to explain complex model to the end users.
Maybe coming on to another point then, Charlotte. So with what Yassine has said there, what does this mean the main principles need to be for how an AI system is designed and how it's built?
Well, that's a good question. In fact, with Yassine and other colleagues, we have been doing a little research about that, and we found many versions of what we could call the pillar of responsible AI. Some say that you have 3 main principles, other many more until maybe 27, I think. For AI in the world of payments, we selected 4 basic principles. The first one, we already talked about it. It's trust and trustworthiness. So with the explainability that you just mentioned with Yassine, but also compliance, accountability, and what level of autonomy we have for the AI. The second pillar would be security. Security is really important for payments. So we have to respect the data privacy, the accuracy of the answers, and to have a system that are resilient and robust. The third pillar would be more on the human side with the fairness. It's about how to mitigate the bias in our system, how to make sure that we have equity. So for everyone, it can be diversity, inclusion, accessibility, any kind of justice. And also that we have human in control and human in the loop, so we have to think about the social impacts and fight against all kind of abuses. If you have these 3 first principles, then you have AI that is ethical internally, I would say, but it's not enough to have ethical AI. You need to think about the usage, and you need to empower this usage in an ethical way. So to make sure that you respect human rights, human dignity, that you can accompany people in the digital transformation, you can encourage sustainable use cases. Like Yassine said, this green area is really important as well. So this is the 4th pillar. So you have trust, security, fairness, and empowering usage.
So with those 4 principles then, what does that concretely mean when it comes to actually building something? What do the engineers or the product managers have to do?
You're right. It can feel kind of abstract said that way, and maybe it's a lot. So you have to take it step by step, and maybe select some of these principles, the most accurate for your use case, for example. And you can set up specific processes like a transparency review, a clear reporting mechanism, and maybe awareness trainings for the people in the company. You can also work on a governance around AI and AI ethics. And also you have to consider the whole development cycle. It's from the beginning when you are defining your use case, then when you are building your AI system, and as well when it's running in production, like Yassine said. Each step has its own ethical questions.
That's really interesting, Charlotte. And I think it's so often the case, isn't it? You have to understand why you're doing something and the broad principles, but then also you have to translate that to some specific methods or practices that you could apply to achieve those goals. Maybe coming now from a slightly different angle, I'm interested to understand, I guess, which industry players are really pushing this topic of ethical AI. So Yassine, maybe you could say a few words about that.
Yeah, of course. I think that we all agree today that AI is everywhere. Also, ethical AI is something that everybody is starting to talk about. So different stakeholders are dealing with this. So governments, of course, so European Union through the AI Act, initiatives in the United States through the NIST, which is the National Institute of Standards and Technologies, that propose the AI RFM, which stands for AI Risk Management Framework. And we have also tech leaders, but tech leaders today are rather discussing of responsible AI than ethical AI. Even though those topics are not handled at the same level of maturity from one stakeholder to another, within Worldline, actually, it's really an important aspect that we are dealing with, because as a European company and also as a payment leader within Europe, we are dealing with sensitive information related to this industry. So we must and need to provide the best solutions to our client that will be as ethical as possible.
So just there, Yassine, you mentioned ethical AI versus responsible AI. And it wasn't fully clear to me what the difference was. So maybe just could you clarify that a little bit for me?
Sure. Ethical AI, ethics is something related to it's subjective. It's the good versus the bad. It's what is good and what is bad. So people would argue on this differently. And also it gathers many different subtopics. As I said, ethics could be environmental, could be green, it could be fairness, it could be a lot of aspects. Responsible AI, though, is something related to more practical aspects, in our opinion. It means that how can I be responsible? How can I be within the boundaries? How can I respect the legal aspects?
So I see what you're saying. So I guess in some way, ethical AI is about defining what it is you're trying to achieve. And obviously that is subjective, where responsible AI is more the practices around how you can achieve those results that you're looking for. And you mentioned there the stakeholders, governments, or industry bodies, tech players. So what sort of things are they doing, or should they be doing, in your view, in order to reach this level of ethical AI?
I would say that would go in a fourfold solution. So the first thing to go with is to educate people internally, educate also people, our clients, in order to share the same ecosystem and the same environment on which we will work. When you will have educated people, that doesn't exempt from assessing the good behavior that would be provided or thought of. So maybe a good way to go is to have ethical committees, for example, in order to assess those aspects. And the third fold would be regarding the how. So you need to have the tech also to achieve such an approach, meaning that to achieve privacy, to have fairness, to avoid biases, for example, in your model, you need at least more transparency, explainability, to let people have a view on what's happening and keep the good things and get rid of the bad things. And finally, I talked in your first question, I talked about separating the different phases of integrating AI within a product, from the planning, going through the data gathering and model building, and afterwards on the deployment of the approach. I think this is a good separation, but it needs to be even fine-grained by providing subtopics and specifically metrics for each one of the steps in order to achieve those solutions, and let people that will deal with these challenges have clear objectives and clear feedbacks on the outcomes that they would achieve.
Which reminds me of that phrase that what gets measured gets managed, Yassine. So I guess
exactly, absolutely.
That even these old adages still apply with new technologies as well. So in a moment, really interested to hear from you what's happening from a regulatory side, and also maybe more specifically what businesses, banks, merchants need to be doing if they're planning or are using AI now. And of course, on this podcast, always want to get your glimpse into the future and your ideas for what might happen next. Before we come on to all of that, I just want to remind our listeners that if they would like to get in touch with the podcast, let us know any feedback, any suggestions for topics you'd like us to cover in the future, then you can reach us by emailing ndp-podcast@worldline.com. And of course, a gentle reminder, if you haven't already done so, to please subscribe to the podcast and leave us a review and a rating. So, as I said just now, really like to come in a moment onto what your predictions are for the future. But first, maybe Charlotte, you could share a little bit about what you're seeing regulators doing in this area.
Yes, of course. We see a real evolution these days about those regulations. According to the UN, you have 69% of countries around the world that have now data protection or AI legislation in place. They have several approaches about that. The first one will use previous regulations. That's the case in the UK, for instance. You use GDPR, Human Rights Act, etc., to study AI challenges. But in other countries like Brazil, Canada, USA, and now Europe with the AI Act, they are trying to put some new laws that are really adjusting to AI challenges. These challenges are mostly about some paradoxes. First, you have what is called the AI effect. When it's really complicated to define what AI is, because once you solved an AI problem, it doesn't seem to be AI anymore, and you call it something else. So the first thing that the AI Act did is to define what kind of AI they want to consider. And they took a very large definition of AI. For them, it's a machine-based system designed to operate with varying level of autonomy, and that can generate outputs such as predictions, recommendations, or decisions. Another challenge is that you don't want to stop innovation. You want to create an area where innovation is possible, because AI is still evolving, and the AI of tomorrow, it's not the same as the AI of today. So it's a big challenge. And you also have the gap between this AI principle that you are trying to put in place in the law and the implementation, because for now everything is not possible, and the means will evolve as well. Coming back to the AI Act, so it was voted in the European Parliament in March, and in fact it will be adopted in several steps, and the timeline, it's ending in 2 years, so we still have time to put that in place. And the approach was to base the law on risk assessment. So we focus on the high-risk AI systems. So they have key requirements, and they have to complete a conformity assessment. And concerning the unacceptable risks, they are just prohibited. That's basically how it works.
It's really interesting, because I think it reminds me how so often with technology, as something becomes more used and more widespread, regulations then have to evolve and adapt to take account of that. And I guess we've seen it relatively recently with data, would be the example, where of course no one really worried about data use and data monetization when it wasn't being done at any great level of scale. But suddenly, when everyone is leading their lives digitally and has a huge digital footprint, this topic really came to the fore. And of course we saw GDPR. And I think now what surprises me is how much people who 15 years ago wouldn't have even thought about data privacy, now it's a real topic that many people have an understanding of, and they expect their data to be treated with a degree of sensitivity and privacy that they probably wouldn't have thought about, as I say, 15, 20 years ago. So it reminds me of that evolution.
Yes, I think you're right about that. In fact, the Commission at the European Parliament, they even claim that they are proud to be the first to implement a regulation of this nature. And they even hope that it will raise awareness about the proper management of AI services and also the responsible usage of these services.
Maybe now we come on to something sort of very practical from a merchant or a bank perspective. So if a bank or a merchant is either using AI today or planning to use AI for specific areas of their business, what would your recommendations be to them, Yassine? What would you say they need to be doing?
I would come back or refer to something that we've discussed earlier, which was related to the complexity versus explainability of the models. So my answer would be not monolithic. It means that you need to take the right solution for the right usage and the right challenge. Meaning that if in your business, in your industrial requirements, you need accurate results, you need predictable results, then it's better to go with deterministic approaches. Deterministic approaches could be optimization approaches that we could qualify as an AI, but where AI as we know it is not really that much existent. But if we need creativity, if we need something that goes beyond what you are expecting, here that would depend on different techniques. I would give some insights, technical insights, not really much of details, but some techniques such as calibration could be useful, for example. Model calibration helps people that use the model in order to have a probabilistic insight of the outcomes rather than something blurry. It means that if you express the solution of the model, the output of the model as probability, it sounds more familiar for the people, that they understand what are the risks. You need also to take into account some adversarial approaches, because your models would be faced to some external attacks, and they need to be robust against this. And finally, you need to have more transparency and explainability. But this explainability is also twofold. It could be for the end user, for your clients, in order to make them able to understand the outputs and better understand what's going on behind the algorithm, and for the engineering side, because explainability means also having better insights on what is going on the model, and then improve it successively, even from the engineering side. The final part would be maybe the one that is hypest right now, which is generative. Generative AI is used only for fancy, I would say today, fancy approaches where the risks are really low. The first way to go today is to put robustness on this type of approaches in order to avoid what Charlotte mentioned, called as hallucinations. Going with techniques such as RAG, which stands for Retrieval Augmented Generation. So retrieved meaning that you retrieve true information and you use your model only to elaborate about the form rather about the content itself. But if you have more liberty and you can do whatever you want, then you need to watch the juridical aspects. What I mean by this, if you give empowerment to your model, you can go two ways. Either you want the outcome to be really empowered, but you put it behind fences, let's say sandbox. You can achieve and retrieve the maximum of the potential of those algorithms, but within a fence, meaning that you are behind walls that would prevent you to go beyond the law, especially if you want to do decision making. And in this case, it would be rather aid for decision making than decision making itself. Or you are dealing with a case where you can take a risk, asking the algorithm for something new, where the decision-making will be made by this algorithm. But in this case, you would have dynamic fences, I would call, through reinforcement learning algorithm. What reinforcement learning algorithms are algorithms to make the generative approach learn from itself, not only from itself, but rather from the inputs and the feedbacks that it would be provided by the humans through successive iterations. And those feedbacks have the algorithm to understand what is good and what is bad, what is expected from what is not expected, while still having the full empowerment to provide new approaches that goes beyond what the simple expectations of people, to leverage a maximum of the potential of AI. So as a summary, I would say, depends on the usage, depend on industrial challenges. Either you go accurate, determinism, you want creative, some classical, I would say, explainable solutions, or generative. And in this case, you need really to watch the legal aspects and put fences around your model.
And if I summarize the summary, I would say it just shows how broad the field of AI now is, how many different use cases there are, and exactly what you do and which approach you should take depends on both the use case and what outputs and outcomes you're trying to get. So maybe as a final question, then I can come back to you, Charlotte, which is really to ask you what you think might be some of the future developments, and particularly things that people should be watching out for in this space of ethical AI.
Well, they could start by watching the regulations changes. Of course, we really explained that before. This compliant aspect is key. And maybe also look at the various toolkits that are out. But I really want to underline that you should not wait for new standards. In fact, the accountability part is really key too. So we all have responsibilities in the quality of the products that we develop, and we have to make sure that there is no mess with the new technology that we use in our products. So that's a question that we can look at before we have the laws and the compliance part out. And for that, you should work incrementally, so try and learn, maybe have some multidisciplinary approach with AI experts, but also UX experts and people like that. And it's really a way to make better products that will be safer, that will be more inclusive, with a better user experience. So you have everything to win there, and it brings competitive advantages, especially in the current race for AI everywhere. And last, I want also to remind that the goal is to set up a clear environment to encourage responsible innovation in AI and keep a longer term perspective. So do not consider only the AI of today, but also think of the AI of tomorrow.
We had an episode about whether regulations kill or kindle innovation. This is a while ago now. But I always think the regulatory landscape is always interesting because it can help you a little bit understand where the future is going. But also, as you say, usually waiting for regulations is not the best way for a business to act. And that's both in terms of seizing the potential opportunities, but also in terms of behaving ethically and being perceived well by clients and having a sustainable business model. These are things where you often have to be proactive and ahead of where the regulators necessarily are today. So I think it's interesting you bring that out, Charlotte, that of course they give a hint of the future, but they shouldn't be the only point of reference for businesses today. So I have to say, I mean, AI is a broad topic, but it turns out that even ethical AI is quite a broad topic within that. And it's a real pleasure for me to have people that, like you guys, who are such passionate experts on this, able to share some of your insights on the podcast. So really want to thank you both for joining us. Charlotte, thank you so much for coming on to Navigating Digital Payments.
Thank you, David, for having me. It was a great discussion.
And likewise, Yassine, really great to have you here too.
Thank you. It was a pleasure. A great moment shared together.
And that just leaves me to, of course, thank our dear listeners for joining us once again as we navigated digital payments.
Thank you for listening to the Navigating Digital Payments podcast, brought to you by Worldline. Join us next time to learn more about the latest innovations, trends, and predictions for the future of payments.